Slayer has two changes to his effective HP. First, they decrease the defense modifier value, thus decreasing the damage he takes. In the old patch, the sequence did 98 damage. In the new patch, it now does 93, so pretty comparable to what we've seen with the rest of the cast. However, Arc System Works also decreases Guts rating, which means that at lower health percentages, he takes a little more damage. Previously, at 25% HP, this is the damage that he took. 59. This is the damage he takes now. 62, so a swing of 3 damage. All in all, though, when you run all the numbers together, Slayer effectively loses 1 HP point in this patch with these changes. Nice nerf. Slayer's backdash received a minor buff. The first half of the active frames have faster movement speed. To make sure that he travels the same distance, the second half of the active frames have decreased movement speed. This should mean that Slayer should be able to evade more strikes than he could before and take better advantage of his Hand of Doom reversal. Compare that to the current version. Slayer should be able to escape some situations a little more consistently. That being said, it's still not too great of an option for him, as a lot of moves can still catch it. Slayer's 6P has increased recovery. Pretty standard stuff as usual, you'd imagine. Again, this is pretty standard stuff for this patch, and should mean that Slayer is more likely to be whiff punished if he uses this move and fails to hit the opponent in neutral. His 6K has been buffed. In the previous patch, you could hold 6K to make Slayer do a feint attack of sorts, but with a little animation he did at the end of it, the opponent might have a couple of extra frames to react to a throw mix-up. Now there's decreased recovery, so Slayer is able to threaten throw mix-ups a lot faster. I think this is a pretty night and day difference between using this move before and now, and should be something that Slayer is able to use as another mix-up option in his potent arsenal. The change to Farce Slash is a quality of life buff to the move that I'll have a difficult time demonstrating here. In some situations, if Slayer only connected with the first hit against an airborne opponent with Far Standing Slash, they wouldn't combo into the second hit and fall out. Now, the first hit will have the blowback send the opponent downward, and it will also cause a ground bounce effect, very similar to how the second hit of Far Slash behaves currently. So ideally, what this means is if Slayer catches somebody with this move and only the first hit connects, it should behave exactly like that second hit does, allowing Slayer to have access to his consistent combo routing without worrying about any unintentional jake going on. Crouching Heavy Slash has increased recovery, meaning that if Slayer stops his pressure here, the opponent should have a little more time to act. Let's go ahead and compare the two versions side by side. It's a pretty substantial difference, and so now the opponent should be able to reliably take a turn if Slayer chooses to stop his spaced out pressure with this normal. Of course, this doesn't change any of the situations if Slayer chooses to cancel into Mappa Hunches or Dandy Steps. This also affects his counter hit confirms at a very close range. Before, you could pretty easily link a close slash. Here's the behavior now. Close slash completely whiffs. So does 2K. Even 2P. So pretty much whenever Slayer gets a counter hit with his normal, he has to go into special cancels in order to pick up the combo. Although, in the grand scheme of things, this really doesn't matter too much because at the spaces Slayer likes to press this button anyway, he's still able to access pile bunker loops. Etc., etc. A change I won't be able to demonstrate so well is one to Slayer's Jump Dust, which now has increased active frames as well as an added upper hitbox to the extended part of those active frames. There's probably some new saucy aerial combos that Slayer can use, but considering that most of his optimals are based on the ground anyways, I'm not sure if this is necessarily the most important change that Slayer has. If anyone in the comments is able to add some extra light to this particular change below, do let us know in the comments. Arc System Works stated that they wanted to nerf Slayer's ability to take his turn back after he used Mappa Hunch's punch version. So let's see if they're able to accomplish that. Before we look at what they did, let's go ahead and explore this situation in the previous patch to then measure what the situation is like in the current patch. In order to make this consistent and not deal with variables like spacing and neutral or anything like that, let's look at a very common situation that Slayer players could consistently generate from a block string. This block string would space Slayer out just enough to be able to play some pretty one-sided RPS for him. Although granted, it was all a pretty low reward, but it was also fairly low risk. At this range, Slayer's 2P would whiff, but his 2K would reach. 2P, however, would be able to reach against you if you tried to mash against him with a slower normal. First, let's go ahead and start looking at potential options that the opposing player could have had. If they try to go for a slow normal, like Far Slash for example, Slayer will be able to beat it with either of these options. So basically, we've already ruled out most of the cast's far-reaching normals in this situation because Slayer's going to be pressing some of his faster normals here. Oftentimes, Slayer would generally be within the range of his opponent's kick buttons, which tend to be a little slower than their punches. This creates some interesting mind games, though, because once you extend your hurt box with a kick normal, some of the faster jabs would be able to win out in this situation. I have the dummy Asuka here set to do 5k on block. It's about 8 frames startup of a move. So, let's go ahead and check the situation out. If I mash 2P here, I'm able to beat that 5k. However, if I go for 2k here against this particular normal, I trade with it. So now let's take a look at what happens when the opponent chooses to jab. My 2k loses. My 5p loses. As does my 2p. So jabbing feels like just the best way to get out of this, right? However, once Slayer knows that you're going to be pressing these fast jab normals, then he could go ahead and try and threaten some dandy step pressure by using the kick version. Basically, if you mash against it, you gave Slayer some free pressure here. Then you want to be able to try and call him out by going for a far range normal. But then his faster normals would beat those normals and give him more turns on offense. Of course, in this situation, the next layer then was for you to press nothing and keep an eye out for that kick dandy step. But if you did that, Slayer could just then press his faster normals and take his turn again. So you can see how Slayer has a lot of control over this situation, and the opponent is put into a guessing situation against him in the previous patch. Now, they've increased Slayer's recovery on this, so now options that would have been able to trade before or potentially beat the opponent's reversal normal will no longer work. Remember when 2K traded against Asuka's 5K? Now it loses cleanly. Now here's the kicker in this particular matchup. My 5K as Slayer has more range than Asuka's 5K. So I can actually press 5k here and punish the Asuka player's attempt to go for their farthest range, fastest normal. With this particular spacing, even with the increased disadvantage frames that Slayer has because of Mappa Hunch's increased recovery, 5k from Slayer is able to beat pretty much every single normal of Asuka's in that situation. 2k whiffs and gets punished, 5k whiffs and gets punished, the jabs don't beat the 5k kick either, and Far Slash and 2 Slash, as well as Sweep, are too slow in their startup to actually hit before 5k from Slayer does. This means that Asuka's best normal to throw out in this situation to beat 5k is 6p. Now that we've been able to isolate this one choice from the opponent, Slayer is able to make some predictable reads based on this interaction. If the opponent chooses to go for 6p and I, as a Slayer player in this example, read it, and now I go for a 2 heavy slash, well, I can basically get some pile bunker loops depending on my positioning on screen. So then we have to look at what Asuka can do to beat this 2 heavy slash press. 5k will reach because Slayer's hurt box expands as he does 2 heavy slash. So Asuka is able to use this normal, but again, that normal loses to Slayer's 5k. We can rule out pretty much any low Asuka has because 2 heavy slash will low crush those attacks, so then we go back to some of his other faster moves, but his jabs are spaced out so that they won't reach Slayer. So now basically Asuka's best normal to get the most reward against Slayer's 2 heavy press in this situation is to use Far Slash. This is able to reach Slayer and stop the 2 heavy slash from coming out with a counter hit starter, which means there's extra damage for Asuka here. However, this normal will lose to 5k. And it's a counter hit confirmed for Slayer as well in this situation. Regardless of how this plays out, if Slayer's right, he's getting a counter hit starter, one of them being one of his most potent starters that leads to some of his highest damaging sequence, the other just still being a pretty good starter for himself. Not to mention the whole element of what happens once Slayer adds Dandy Step into this situation. Because the enemy character is going to likely be pressing normals that have longer recoveries than their jabs, there's more of an opportunity for Slayer to actually get whiff punishes in this situation from using things like Pile Bunker in his Dandy Step. If the opponent had jabbed there like they would have in the previous version of the game, they would be able to block that Pile Bunker. So when we look at these particular situations and how they play out, Arc System Works took the step in the right direction by increasing the recovery on punch Mappa Hunch to make it so that the opponent would be able to more consistently take their turn. They then completely undid that effort by increasing the knockback on this move so that now Slayer is spaced out to have better RPS tools in this situation, making the opponent try to fight their way out with more committal options that lead to better reward for Slayer overall. Simply well done, Arc System Works. Simply well done. Now, for the current version of the game, the blowback is a little higher for the opponent, allowing Slayer to link a 2k. It is a little spacing dependent, as you can see, but it is an opportunity for Slayer to get more damage meterlessly in a situation that he couldn't do so before. Now for an intended buff to Mappa Hunch punch version. Previously, the counter hit blowback would be launching the opponent pretty close to the ground. It was not possible for Slayer to pick a conversion up here without expending resources. Before I continue onwards, the last thing I'll say about the whole Mappa Hunch situation here is that I would encourage everyone to do extensive labbing in that situation with your own character. I demonstrated all the examples here with Asuka, but not all characters are created equally in Guilty Gear Strive, and there might be some tools that characters will have that make them a little stronger in this situation to fight against Slayer. Pile Bunker's damage was increased. Previously, it did 60 damage. And here's the new damage. 67, so a slight increase, though I'm pretty sure that people would read the patch notes and see that Slayer, a character known for his high damage, getting damage buffs in this version of the game, is probably not going to be setting off the best of impressions for the patch. Let's look at Super Mappa Hunch, or Dead on Time as it used to be referred to in earlier versions of Guilty Gear. So previously, this was a proper reversal for Slayer to use. It also had some great utility at full screen to try and punish anyone who was trying to zone him. Overall, a pretty strong arsenal for Slayer's toolkit that covered a lot of matchup spreads for different reasons. Against characters that wanted to rush him down, he had a good reversal. Against zoners, he had an option to deal with their zoning and punish them for it. Now, Super Mappa Hunch doesn't have iframes on startup anymore. So this means that Slayer can no longer use this as a reliable reversal option. It does maintain some iframes partway through the attack, which means it still has some utility as an anti-zoning tool. However, you'll find that even in that function, it's incredibly much worse. You can still function, but you got to be pretty quick with this, and depending on the projectile speeds, there's probably going to be some matchups where it's not going to be viable to use this to punish them for it. Overall, I think it's a fair nerf. Slayer's last listed change in the patch notes is to Last Horizon. I didn't even mean to do that with the last, but anyways. They increased the input priority on it, so now it should be coming out a little more consistently as opposed to other follow-ups Slayer could do. A nice quality of life fix for the character that I'm sure the player base will appreciate. I feel like for a majority of the player base, this isn't exactly the patch notes that they wanted to see for Slayer. I imagine that most people would have loved to see this vampire gutted and completely phased out of the meta. However, I don't necessarily agree with that philosophy when it comes to patching fighting games. Just because a character is strong doesn't mean that they deserve to get gutted. I rather would see a character's more frustrating elements to fight against be toned down. I think of the example of how Arc System Works tried to rework Ramlethal. in this patch. They wanted to remove the frustrating element of, now great, I'm in the corner against her and I'm fighting the infinite mid dispenser, cranking my risk gauge until she finally cracks me with an unreactable high-low mix and I die for that one. I can see why they changed the way she played the way she did while trying to retain her strengths so that she still was a fun and strong character to play. I think it's okay for fighting game characters to be strong. After all, a strong character in a fighting game can be a fun character for a lot of people to play. They fulfill certain power fantasies that some players have or give these certain niche identities, and if the kit doesn't function or things don't work, then the enjoyment, I think, goes down. I think that Arc System Works had the right idea with Slayer in some ways, but they didn't fully actually test out some of the changes that they did to actually enforce this. And I'm namely looking at Mappa Hunch with the P version of the move and how the RPS situation seems to have been more favorably changed to go in Slayer's direction. That being said, I only looked at Asuka in these examples, and I did not explore the intensive cast here to see what normals reach and what options work or what, character unique special moves there are to deal with that situation. So I will again encourage everybody watching this video who is dooming on Slayer and is throwing their hands up in the air going, oh god, he's still top tier. Go look at this situation, set up the same options that I did with a recording in those scenarios, and see what your character can do so you can develop an understanding of that situation to try and fight from an informed position against Slayer. Now, that being said, I also do think that some nerfs definitely hit their mark. Super Mappa Hunch is a good nerf to Slayer. For someone who is so aggressively powerful in terms of his mix-ups as well as his high damage confirms, removing his ability to reversal just takes one less thing off of the opponent's mental stack to worry about when fighting the character. So that now, once you get your offense going against this vampire, you're able to just be in complete control, and the Slayer player, forgive my rhyme, has to find their own way out without using a reversal option to cover multiple options like a throw or a frame trap. Instead, they have to make the right specific reads in order to escape. And I think that's more than appropriate for a character who, generally speaking, likes to completely take away his opponent's decisions to make choices and instead force them to make guesses. So overall, we'll see where Slayer goes. I think there's a lot of promise within this potential Season 4 patch, and we'll have to see how it fleshes out once the bug fixes come through from Arc System Works. I'm interested to see if they're able to see that the damage in the game is probably still too high, especially in some cases, and see if they are actually able to tone down the overall damage in the game itself in a follow-up patch that's designed to kind of balance the system of the game itself, as well as target any particular outliers and bring them a little more in line with the rest of the cast. This is the end of the Guilty Gear Strive Season 4 patch notes breakdown. We've covered all of the characters that existed before this patch and are in this patch now. There isn't a video on Dizzy because we got introduced in this patch, and there's already many great content creators who are making their own guides and have experience playing the character to speak from. To everyone who's commented on the videos, liked them, shared them around, and interacted with me all the way through, I sincerely appreciate it. It means a lot to me. This is primarily an exercise I do for myself to teach myself what's changed with this game so that when I go and commentate for some online or offline events, I know what I'm talking about, and I'm trying to understand what's new with the game and how characters are behaving in this. But I also do it to make sure that other people can also be aware of those changes and play from an informed position. So thank you all for watching this video. I'll catch you in the next series.